Everyone, welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. Please hit the like button as you come on. That helps boost the stream in YouTube's algorithm. But we have a big show for you today on this Saturday. Thanks for joining me on your weekend. For Trump, things have just gone from bad to worse as he deals with his own scandal involving the Jeffrey Epstein email dump that has his name all over them. Zelensky is now mired in a corruption scandal rocking the entire Ukrainian regime. Airstrikes have gotten heavier, and the lights and the heat is being shut down in Kiev by Russian fire. The front lines continue to deteriorate as Trump ponders deporting Ukrainians based in the United States back to their homeland, where they will find themselves conscripted and likely dead within hours of being sent back. To discuss all of this and more, I have with me international affairs and security analyst and expert Mark Sleboda. Mark, good to see you again.
Danny, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Right. It's always fun and informative, Mark. Well, let's get started. How about we begin with the massive strikes that have been occurring on Kiev? This has been getting much more attention in mainstream media. The New York Times reported on this, saying that Russia, you can't really see the title, but Russian pummels Kiev as it torments Ukrainian civilians, saying that Russian missiles and drones have pounded Kiev in an attack that killed 6 people and sparked fires in buildings.
Wait a minute. So how many drones and missiles did they report were fired?
It doesn't say. Well, I think it says 19 missiles and 430 drones. That's what
okay. So 19 missiles and 430 drones, and there's 6 people collateral damage. That is what I call an amazingly precise strike, exactly avoiding civilians. In fact, especially when it's considered that those 6 casualties almost certainly occurred from falling debris from air defense fire,
air defenses, right,
and the odd interception over Kiev. That is almost certainly what those 6 were. But regardless, I mean, let's forget it. You know, they described this as an attack on civilians. No. What Israel does, what the U.S. allied Israel does in Gaza, is deliberate attacks on civilians, right? To wipe out and drive away civilians. What Russia does is precise strikes. I mean, let's compare it to, I don't know, even let's say U.S. strikes on Sana'a, right? You know, on the Houthis in Yemen, right? With dozens and dozens of collateral damage with each strike. No, this is pure propaganda, pure propaganda, and it's said, just papered over the facts that are laid out there for you, right? I mean, it's obvious. You know, 430 drones, dozens of missiles, 6 collateral damage. Come on. I mean, intelligence check here.
Well, Mark, let's dispel the propaganda. Why are these attacks happening seemingly daily now? The New York Times and many mainstream publications, NBC, are making a lot out of the lights being turned out in Ukraine and now maybe the gas being turned out in Ukraine, especially in the capital, Kiev. So what's going on? Where do these attacks fit into this larger strategy by Russia?
Okay, so I mean, going into the winter, as you know, the Kiev regime defenses crumble and buckle all along the front of the contact line. This is meant to shut down the regime's military force, right? And it has to be said that they're not only targeting, right, as you said, electrical infrastructure, gas infrastructure, not being reported on as well, but also railway infrastructure is being hit very hard. They're going to shut down the Kiev regime's ability to wage war, even such as it is thus far, right? Yes, you know, shutting down electricity affects civilians. That is, more a side effect, a byproduct, right? This is no different than every conflict that the U.S. has waged, whether in Serbia or Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam. It always goes after the energy supply. That's what Russia does as well, because you deprive your opponent of the infrastructure it needs domestically to wage war. They have been targeting not only substations, but also increasingly they're going after all of the thermal plants, the power generative facilities, and that lets us know that this is a new level of attack. That they are going after the power generative facilities as well, just not not just the interconnecting substation nodes that they have in previous attacks. They're going for a knockout blow at the power system at this point, at least as much as they can. They reportedly even some substations taking away electricity from the Kiev regime's two remaining nuclear power plants in West Ukraine. That those were targeted as well. Not the power plants themselves, but the electrical substations, taking electricity, out of those and putting it into the Kiev regime's Soviet-built electrical power grid. If the electricity goes out, the Kiev regime, right, their military industrial facilities, the underground drone workshops and whatnot, obviously they don't work. The trains that largely rely on electricity also don't work. That inhibits the Kiev regime's ability to move troops and ammunition and everything else around, because that's still the primary means of moving things around on anything beyond the very local scale. So Russia's going for a knockout blow, and part of that, yes, is the gas distributive network. And the reason why Russia hasn't hit the gas distributive network before is because that network was also involved when Russia sent gas to Europe. Well, that's no longer on the table now. That's not even necessary. Russia has signed the Power of Siberia 2 deal with China, and the gas that had once gone to Europe is going to be destined for China. So if Russia was not hitting the gas distributive facilities in Ukraine, right, out of self-interest alone, they no longer have that self-interest and restraint. So they no longer have to even think that at one day they might resume gas supplies to Europe. So those are now completely free game without any self-interest worries whatsoever. Now, we do know that the Kiev regime just in the last week, they have acquired and put online some more Patriot systems. A few weeks ago, it's already, I guess, over a month ago, but they did get a few older Patriot systems from Israel. And then again, in most recent days, some more, probably two more batteries from Germany. And there is some evidence that there was some attempts to intercept some of Russia's missiles and drones with Patriots, mostly, trying to intercept the missiles with the Patriots, shorter range stuff for the drones during the most recent Russian attacks. And almost certainly those Russian attacks were also aimed at taking those Patriots out. Now, two salient details here. One of the largest supply, the largest amount of missiles that have hit Kiev in the past week and a bit beyond that have been the new modified Iskander-M ballistic missiles. Now, it was only a few weeks ago that the Kiev regime itself admitted, right, that its interception rate of the new Iskander-M with Patriots, the Patriot interception rate of the Iskander-M is 6%. 6% chance of bringing down an Iskander-M. And that's almost certainly exaggerated, because the Kiev regime exaggerates everything. So we can assume that, maybe it's 3, somewhat less than 6%. So Patriots, even if they get them, they're really not extremely effective. In fact, I think you could say the opposite. They're absolute crap. Right? They have a very low rate of bringing down Russian interceptions. That doesn't mean Russia's not going to bother to take them out. Of course they are, but they don't represent a threat. Now, on top of that, we had statements from the U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, I guess, because Marco Rubio is he's doing double duty in both positions in the Trump administration for whatever reason. He admitted this week in an interview, a publicized, a televised interview, that when the U.S. sends, when anyone sends air, but the U.S. makes all the Patriot systems. When the U.S. sends Patriot systems to Ukraine, that their life expectancy is about a week. He mentioned specifically that Russia usually takes them out about a week after they're deployed, and that's been going on, he said, for 2 or 3 years. Which, at this point, why do you keep sending them? It's just you have to really question their sanity when they keep wasting what air defense they have. And of course, the U.S. has stopped delivering air. Now they're forcing the Europeans and the Israelis and everyone else to send them. But even then, coming up with a logic, other than just buying another week, is that the cost of a Patriot battery, buying a week? But they were almost certainly targeted in these strikes as well. So. And of course the Kiev regime's military industrial facilities, the underground drone workshops, and such as that may have been in Kiev. But yeah, we saw plenty of videos provided through the week. Kiev has probably been without power in the last week more than it has been with power, and you get the feeling, and there have been enough statements by the Ukraine Centenergo, the energy company, that they're essentially one big strike away from the entire system collapsing, and then only being able to provide power to very separated parts of the nation's electrical grid. In fact, they've said the one city, the one central Ukrainian city of Poltava, it's now completely disconnected from the electrical, and they don't have any easy way to restore it. So it is literally we're at the lights out moment for Kiev. Russia has been building towards this. The first couple of energy strikes were just stressing the system, sussing it out to a degree, maybe. And strikes since then, yeah, we've had long periods where they didn't, but because they're moving into the winter now, of course, that is going to put increased pressure, one would think, on the Kiev regime to lessen the amount of burden on the civilian population. But nope, they've told the people, just leave the cities. Go to the villages where you can burn wood. That's essentially what they have told the people of Kiev. I mean, not essentially, that is literally what they have told the people of Kiev, to leave the big cities. So one would think that out of humanitarian concern for their own people, they would seek terms, but of course not, because it's ideological. It's Banderite fascism. It's Russian hatred as the Maidan Miluz, ideological identity. So that's not possible. So Russian long range. Now, it has to be said, let's give it fair. The Kiev regime has made a couple of big long range strikes themselves on Russia in reply the last week. In fact, as the last biggest strike on the 14th was going one way, the Kiev regime was making a large drone strike and at least a few missiles this time the other way. This week we saw, in one night, we saw over 100 drones downed just over the Crimea. And I didn't hear about any significant breakthroughs there. There was also attacks in the Krasnodar region in Novorossiysk, and I did hear about one refinery that got hit there, and possibly a chemical plant suffered some damage as well. So they're getting a few licks in. By far, Russian air defense and electronic warfare, interconnected, integrated, multi-layered, is bringing down the vast majority. And how do we know that? Because the West tells us that. The British Royal United Services Institute has admitted that when it comes to long-range drone strikes, that the Russian air defense system is bringing down 95% of Ukrainian drones. 95%. Think about that. I mean, 5% get through. Okay. I mean, it's a war. There's a cost. Nothing is ever 100%. I'm amazed at a number like 95%, considering how big a territory Russia has to defend, right? You simply can't put air defense everywhere, but it seems they're doing it somehow. I really can't imagine how. Very strategic placement, I would guess. And we do know, of course, that whenever these long-range Kiev regime strikes are about to take place, there's always extensive reconnaissance, surveillance with NATO planes, particularly reconnaissance planes, particularly in the Black Sea, spy planes, trying to map out and find gaps in the Russian air defense for these strikes. Yeah, we call them Kiev regime strikes, but let's be honest, they're NATO strikes, NATO drone strikes on Russia, but 5%. And they've tried to make a huge deal out of their strikes on refineries, and the Russian economy is about to shut down, and all Russians are waiting in gas lines, and all of this nonsense. None of it is true. And how do we know it's true? I mean, first of all, you could trust me saying there aren't any gas lines. All right. So I believe that for a couple of days in one southern region of Russia, and Russia being the largest country in the world, there were some distributive problems, right? And there was some lines, and that was like a couple of months ago. That was it, and it was gone within a couple of days, and that was only in a southern region of Russia. But that was blown up, of course, into all of Russia's experiencing shortages and whatnot. But we know that this attempt to strike Russia's energy infrastructure to damage their economy has failed. Why? Because the Western press tells us it has. There was a report out from Reuters in the last week that admitted that Russia's oil exports year on year of refined oil is down. The refining process is down 3%. 3%. That's the grand total of all this noise that they have been making. And again, in a war, the other side's always going to get some licks through. I'll take that 3% on the chin because we know that Russia is dealing immensely more damage on a nightly basis to the Kiev regime and of course through the conductive, transitive prophecy to NATO as well. So it is as much a war of attrition when we're talking long-range strikes as it is otherwise, and Russia is winning that long-range strike as well. There was also a report out by Defense Express this week that they're worried that there is a very real fear that the Kiev regime is running out of missiles and drones, that they won't be able to, that they're losing the ability to produce them and produce like the rocket fuel necessary for missiles, and everything is going away because of Russia's long-range strikes. Right. And also, not only are they losing the capability to build them, to use them, but we also had a report out this week, I believe in the Financial Times, about Russia's Rubicon drone center, which I did a special on my channel a couple of months ago. This is Russia's elite drone unit, which is now already synonymous practically with fear, among Ukrainian troops. And one of the thing they've done lots of things, and they're eviscerating the Kiev regime's logistics and the operational rear and everything else. But one of the things that they've become very good at, as the Western media tells us, is hunting the Kiev regime's own drone operators. So this is drone on drone. And they're not, not just interceptions in the sky. They are hunting down, and taking out the Kiev regime's drone operators in their tactical rear. And they've gotten good enough at it that the Financial Times is talking about it and how much of a problem it is. So, meaning it can't be denied any longer. So, whether we're talking long range strikes or whether we're talking tactical strikes with FPV drones and the like along the contact line and in the tactical rear, then Russia's overwhelming again. Drones, missiles. It long range, short range doesn't make any difference. Russia has an advantage in every category, and the rest is just it's like any type of let's say I don't know, computer game, of the RPG style where you have to grind for a while to get yourself up in level. That's, Russia is ending. I would say they're close to ending the grinding phase. It's been going on for a while, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be completely over. But I think that all of the successes, long range and on the battlefield, in the past couple of weeks have shown that the Kiev regime is just losing the ability in all facets to effectively resist, right? Whereas previously they couldn't resist Russia everywhere. That was the story of the last year, but they could, if not stop, then at least significantly slow down Russian advances somewhere. In some places where they concentrated forces, they're not able to do that. That Russia is capable of advancing pretty much at will where it wants to now. And all of the reinforcements and the counterattacks that the Kiev regime launches, as they have been over the last week in Pokrovsk, Mirnograd area and in Kupiansk, are ineffective. They have not achieved any results. And the cost, of course, in terms of manpower and munitions and equipment of doing those failed counterattacks is just hastening the end.
Yeah, well, let's talk about maybe on the battlefield, Mark. There was a report in Times, UK Times, the Times, about Pokrovsk, and I wanted you to talk about what's going on there because they're talking about the fall of Pokrovsk and what it tells us about the war. They're saying it's a message to the White House from Russia, but also they underplay, typical British style, underplay Russia's advances, saying now, as has been a theme in the West, that Pokrovsk isn't actually that important anymore. But all of this, I want you to dispel and help us understand exactly the kind of advances that have been made, because we're hearing more and more, even from the Western mainstream media, about Pokrovsk falling.
Well, I mean, if you listen to what Zelensky has said in the last week, there's only 300 Russian troops in all of Pokrovsk, and they're fleshing them out. And, the Kiev regime has won the battle there and in Kupiansk and everywhere else, right? And that is in the reality, the emperor and his non-closed reality that Zelensky lives in. In the real world, Russia controls Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk itself, the city, is under Russian control. Now, there might still be a few holdouts, isolated, unable to connect with the Kiev regime military forces or organize any organized defense in some basement somewhere. I mean, that's possible. Or Russia, it's going to take Russia a while to clear out and secure. But Pokrovsk is taken. But what the Russian forces did do is provide kind of a golden road that they herded the Kiev regime forces out of, not to the north towards the contact line, where the contact line is now north of Pokrovsk, but to the east, effectively deeper into the cauldron, to Mirnograd. Which is kind of like it's an agglomerated settlement with Pokrovsk. And that's actually where the majority of the Kiev regime's, heavy fortifications for Pokrovsk were, but they were all directed to, the fortifications were all aligned to defend to the east. And the Russian forces came from every direction, of course, because they deeply flanked and infiltrated the city from multiple directions. So those fortifications aren't of much use to them, shall we say. But we don't know how many troops are left in Mirnograd. We know that a little over a week ago, almost 2 weeks ago now, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported that there were 5,500 roughly Kiev regime troops in the greater Pokrovsk cauldron. I would say that there are considerably less than that now. And the number of videos of Russia taking out the residential buildings in Mirnograd that the Kiev regime forces have set themselves up in, right? Citadels, as they're called, right? That's what the high-rise sections of the towns become. They're called citadels in the parlance of this war. And Russia is just they're not even bothering to storm them. Russia has enough glide bombs. The Kiev regime reported, their intelligence reported to their media this week that Russia is exposed to make 120,000 glide bombs over the course of the year. 120,000. So they can use them for anything. And now the glide bombs, the new glide bomb kits cover twice the distance, right? Up to 150 kilometers. So allowing the aircraft to stay way in the absolute completely safe zone, without any chance of whatever remnant air defense that the Kiev regime has of presenting any kind of threat. So the glide bombs go in and an entire building goes down, and it's pretty dramatic, and of course terrifying footage to see. But the Kiev regime forces have been told to by the Russian forces surrender. You have no chance of escape. You have no chance of reinforcement of anything. You're cut off from ammunition and everything else, and they have not largely. I mean, we've seen some small surrenders, but the Kiev regime forces, at a substantial number of those left are probably of the Kiev regime's ideological cores, and they probably will avoid surrender until the very end, when there's not very many of them left. But one of the shall we say, the most interesting environmental effects of the conflict, particularly in the Pokrovsk area, over the last week, has the weather. There has been a very thick and pervasive fog over much of the Donbass, and especially the Pokrovsk area, for about a week now, a little over a week. And it's still there. And it has really, it's created advantages and disadvantages on both sides. One thing is that drones don't fly. The birds don't fly when there's fog like this, or they fly to a much lesser degree. Because they're simply not able to adequately fly and navigate in fog this thick. So that that almost brings us back to an earlier phase of the conflict when there isn't constant drone swarms everywhere that present such an immediate threat, not just to infantry, but to vehicles as well. And there was dramatic footage this week of Russia moving convoys, moving equipment, equipment men into Pokrovsk. Again, moving not an invasion, right? This was simply taking advantage of the opportunity to, bring more forces in to secure. Not a case of attacking, because Pokrovsk has already been taken. But this footage, I mean, you saw the thick fog. You saw a few troops standing off to the sides that were, essentially casually directing the forces forward. There was no hurry. There was no sense of any attack because the drones weren't flying. So, and this was already well in the rear. But it was kind of images somewhere between Mad Max and Silent Hill. I mean, that was definite. The vibes, or I don't know, Stephen King's The Mist. The reality of this conflict, of the type of vehicles that were being used, Russia has, to a very significant degree, in the last, say, half a year, stopped using military vehicles in terms of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and APCs because of the constant and pervasive drone effect. And I must say the Kiev regime has done the same, although at least on their side, a big part of that as well, simply they don't have them. Russia's just been stockpiling them for, potential extension of the conflict with NATO. But what you'll see in this video is motorcycles. You'll see actually civilian vehicles that have been commandeered as disposable, even having their doors ripped off so that if a drone does attack, that they can quickly evacuate the vehicle, right, saving as many lives as possible. And that's just the nature of the modern conflict with drones, FPV drones, to the extent that they have come to dominate the conflict, along the contact line. So pretty surreal videos. Very, very interesting. Now, fog also means that that also, however, yes, Russia has a drone advantage, right? But they've been taking advantage of the opportunity themselves to move forces around into Pokrovsk and elsewhere. I've also seen there was at least one tank attack this week, a big tank incursion that we haven't seen for a while, simply because that the fog is thick enough that they feel safer operating vehicles without, having a multi-million-dollar tank taken down by a drone worth a few hundred or a few $1,000s. Which simply isn't cost effective in a war of attrition, which is why they're being stockpiled at this moment. But also artillery, airstrikes. There's much less of all of this because of this environmental condition for this week, which again creates advantages and disadvantages. An advantage for the Kiev regime is that if some of their troops decided to abandon their positions and attempted to escape through the cauldron, running through muddy, fog-covered fields in ones and twos in the middle of the night, they have a better chance. I'm not saying a good chance, but they have a better chance of escaping during this fog than they would otherwise, right? So, there's another, effect to consider as a result of this. But it has created some of the most interesting footage and conditions. And of course, it's only temporary. The fog will be gone, and then we'll be back to the regular intensity of drone warfare and kill zones and everything. But Russia was very quick to take advantage of this situation. over the last week in Pokrovsk and multiple other areas. But the Pokrovsk is already taken. The Mirnograd pocket, the cauldron, is shrinking because Russia keeps taking, more and more off the side. And the same thing is going on in Kupiansk as well. Meanwhile, the encirclements of Liman and Konstantinovka and Seversk, and now in the Zaporozhye region, where Russia has made huge advances in the south over the past week, Gulai Polya, the important security and logistical center for basically everything short of Zaporozhye city itself, is very rapidly facing an encirclement, much faster than anyone thought that they would be as well. And part of that is simply that the Kiev regime doesn't have enough troops. They had to strip troops from the Zaporozhye region and everywhere else in order to launch these failed counterattacks to try to break through the cauldrons in Pokrovsk and further to the north and Kupiansk in the southern Kharkov region. They had to strip troops from everywhere to do it. And then Russia, of course, takes advantage of that. And they certainly are in the Zaporozhye region. And that is, again, the advances are enough that the Western mainstream media has picked up it and raised an alarm, meaning it's not deniable at all how rapid Russian is advancing in those areas. And if Gulai Polya is encircled, and now it's just a matter of time and much less time, then that could collapse the entirety of the Zaporozhye region and the south up to a considerable way up the Dnieper River for the Kiev regime there. And we can already start talking about a Pavlograd direction, right? Because Russia will now be moving in that direction from multiple angles at this point. And one of the things about Pokrovsk, Pokrovsk is not important. I mean, it's no longer directly important for the Kiev regime, of course, because it was a very important transport and logistics node for them for their entire placement in the Donbass, but also providing flanking for their offensive to the south in 2023. So what Russia taking it means is now it will become a very important transport and logistics center for them, right? This was once in the Kiev regime's operational rear, and then it was in their tactical rear. Well, very soon it will be in Russia's tactical rear. And by taking Pokrovsk, right, the way that the railroad network in Donbass, in Donetsk, is situated, Pokrovsk was that last section that, when taken, it will open up the entire use of that railroad network now exclusively for Russia in the Donbass area, right? Vastly improving their own logistics and their ability to move further west. And reflective of that, the Kiev regime stopped all railroad traffic to the Kiev regime's last two remaining big holdouts in the Donbass region, the Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. Railroad traffic to there has been stopped, and evacuations of the civilian population from all the areas around those cities has already begun for some time now. So very, very important for transport and logistics, whatever they may try to claim. More than that, topography. Pokrovsk is on the heights, right? So looking to the west, out of the Donbass region into the Dnepropetrovsk region, there is big, flat valley steppe running all the way to Pavlograd, all the way to the banks of the Dnieper River, which gives Russia a huge advantage. It also is the same way to the north, where the Pokrovsk heights there allow Russia to then move on the Kiev regime's last defensive line, that Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka, which is already undergoing the process of being encircled at this point. So, and topography matters. I mean, this is a big land war for the most part. And having the heights, is a huge advantage in multiple different ways. And for the rest of the Donbass region now, everything is literally downhill and figuratively. So incredible strategic importance. So them trying to deny it is just a huge huff on the copium pipe. I mean, that's just purely where they are at this point. And it will make the Kiev regime's remaining defense of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, this last defensive line, extremely difficult to mount any sustainable defense of these two areas. I expect both Slavyansk and Kramatorsk and essentially all of Donbass to be in Russia's hand no later than next summer. That would be my schedule, and I'm generally considered one of the most pessimistic, right, of the security analysts in the alt media sphere. I would also say that makes me the most realistic, and I think my timetables hold up much better than those people who have been predicting a Russian victory in 2 months, every 2 months since the war has begun. But take it.
Right. Mark, well, maybe you can respond to what the Times was saying regarding Russia sending a message to Washington, because Donald Trump has been very silent about all of this for the most part. And of course, he's got his own problems now with the whole Epstein Gate scandal. But really, the U.S. side, for whatever the Times is rattling on about, has been very quiet about Ukraine at this moment. Talk about that.
This is the mentality of that, is this incredible type of hubris that I think everything revolves around it. It's sending a message. I mean, maybe a message should be delivered by this, right? That the White House should, understand. But I mean, they're not taking Pokrovsk to send a message. What kind of rhetorical nonsense, and solipsism is that? I don't know. It's just this incredible hubris, or the White House should take certainly a lesson from this. And I don't know, these people that it has had advising it, like Kellogg and Waltz and these others that are, just repeating the propaganda nonsense that the Kiev regime reports to them as if it's real. I think the U.S. It is obviously trying as much as possible to dump this conflict off on Europe. To some degree, that is definitely true with finances and military, where they say they'll be happy to send some military gear, although not others, like Patriot interceptors, because we don't have enough of those. But the Europeans have to pay for it. But more than that, it's more about political responsibility. Trump is desperate, right, to not be seen as the man who lost or surrendered Ukraine to Vladimir Putin, right? He's desperate not to be seen as losing. So he's trying to dump the losing portion off on the Europeans, which is just absolutely futile, because the Western media is going to blame Trump, right, from here to tomorrow. The American media, the European media, it doesn't make any difference. Trump is ultimately going to be blamed for this, right? Other people will get blamed as well. I mean, even Biden is blamed by the media, which has been, driving this conflict. I mean, they are a real political actor, seemingly more invested in the escalation of this conflict, the entire course of it, than anyone else. They have castigated Biden for being too slow and too cautious in the escalation of weapon supplies. right? Oh, if Biden had just provided all the Tomahawks and the F-16s and everything all immediately right in the beginning, never mind the Kiev regime's even ability to use these weapons, which they've never shown. But even Biden was blamed. Well, Trump will get much more blame. All right, this will be the war that he will become the scapegoat, and he might seek to avoid that, but he can't. So there's nothing to be said. Russia is certainly not going to go out of their way to save Donald Trump face. They have made it clear that they believe that from at least discussions or what they call understandings, not deals, but discussions at Alaska, that they had reached at least the tentative idea of how a settlement of the conflict might be seriously talked about, at least in Alaska. And evidently Trump walked back from that. And they are increasingly seeing the U.S., not just under Trump, because Trump would have been the best possibility for a diplomatic settlement. And, with any other government other than Trump, it would be absolutely impossible. But they now understand that the U.S. is diplomatic incapable. I mean, I think they should have realized that long before, but, the Kremlin still had hope that there might be a diplomatic settlement to this conflict at some point. I think that's been abused now and cast aside, at least for the time being. They might try to pick it up again at some point, but right now it's not about sending a message to the White House. It's about winning on the battlefield. And maybe the White House should take a message from that, but they're not being sent a message by that.
Yeah. I mean, it's been really interesting to watch Trump and his administration go from intensely playing at negotiations to now mired in all kinds of other issues and potential wars without really any mention of this conflict, other than maybe Budapest will happen at some point in the indefinite future.
Rubio shrugged this week, right? Atlas shrugged, right? Rubio shrugged this week. First, there was it was in the same conversation about Russia taking out whatever Patriots that the U.S. sent to Ukraine within a week. But he was also asked about sanctions, and he's like, "Oh, yeah, we sanctioned Rosneft and Lukoil. There's not really left money else we can sanction. I don't know what you want us to do." And he just kind of shrugged.
Yeah, that's it's an absolute. I mean, it really is a circus show. It is.
Yeah, it is. Show. I mean, if there's not a win and there's only a loss there, you can, the U.S. is still providing the intelligence and U.S. generals are still directing things, but they're all doing it very quietly and on the lowdown. And right. It is important that the money is not coming from the United States now. I mean, Trump has dumped all of that off on the Europeans, and the Europeans just can't afford the $100 billion plus bill that is just keeping the lights on in the Kiev regime every year. I mean, that's why their only hope is of stealing Russia's assets, but that would even only, barely keep the Kiev regime, not even for 2 years, right? So that it's just, not possible. But I mean, obviously the White House is trying as much as they can to distance themselves from this conflict while trying to avoid being blamed from surrendering it. But, right. They're obviously, Venezuela is now seen as the low-hanging fruit, right? And I'm sure there are people in the bowels of the blob, of the deep state, Langley, whatever, who are viewing this as a geopolitical, chess match of a longer game, and saying, oh, you think you're going to take our proxy night in Ukraine away from us? Well, blam, we're gonna pull Nepal out there, and Blam, Syria. Oh yeah, you like Assad? He's gone, and Al Qaeda is in his place now, and he's welcomed in the White House, and you'll even have to suck up to him in the Kremlin. And
through the back door. I mean, he had to go through the back door in Washington.
Yeah, and then
ridiculous.
Now Venezuela, right? And of course, Venezuela is not insignificant, with the largest proven oil reserves in the world, significant gas supplies. It's going to be a blow, right? Geopolitically, to the multipolar world side, if you want to view it that way there. But at the end of the day, Venezuela is very, very far away from Russia and China, and there is very little that they can do militarily. The most they could possibly do is raise the costs. And while the Washington Post told us a week ago that Maduro desperately called Russia and China and Iran asking for military aid, the statement from Lavrov this week was that Maduro hadn't requested any military aid from Russia, which frankly I actually find a little hard to believe. But I think it's already Russia distancing themselves from what happens in Venezuela, because ultimately all they could do is raise the costs in a best case scenario. Everything is on. It's not even on the Maduro government now, right? If the U.S. conducts decapitation strikes, right, and obviously the CIA is working overtime to co-opt and buy out and bribe the Venezuelan armed forces, the local political officials, just like what they did in Syria, what they attempted to do in Iran with less success. Right. That's what they're doing, right? They don't plan on taking Venezuela with a big ground invasion or anything like that. They think they can do it with decapitation strikes and the CIA and the opposition and probably Colombian mercenaries and the like. They think they can, right? It's out of Russia's and China's hands at this point. They're just too far away. They don't have the ability to provide power projection, logistics, all of that across the oceans, to Venezuela. Everything is on the Venezuelan people, right? If the Venezuelan people believe in the Bolivarian Revolution, then they can sustain a counterinsurgency warfare that will make, even if they're able to take out Maduro and the Venezuelan government, governance of Venezuela and of course the oil trade, which is the most important grab out of it, impossible. If not, then Venezuela will become another U.S. client state. And I can't say that. I haven't been to Venezuela. I can't judge what will happen there. But I can tell you that the Venezuelan government and Venezuelan military is vastly outclassed, in this particular situation. If the U.S. wants the Venezuelan government gone, they will go. Then if the question becomes the occupation and governance of the country. As always, right? Blowing stuff up is easy. Controlling and then reorganizing, right? That is where the U.S. failed in Iraq and Afghanistan and everywhere else. And I think that Trump's hesitation up till this point shows that. But now we've got the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier group on hand, that will double the offensive power, in the immediate area, in the immediate theater. So evidently in the last few hours, Trump has declared he has made a decision on what he's going to do on Venezuela, but he's not going to tell us what it is.
No, of course not.
Because this is the show. I mean, Danny, are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here? Are you not entertained?
Before we get deeper into Venezuela, actually, Mark, help us understand what's going on in Ukraine vis-a-vis this major corruption scandal, because everywhere in the collective West, the mainstream media is talking about this. Our friends at DD Geopolitics posted this about Zelensky's Wallace, Timur Mindich, suspected of a huge corruption scheme in Ukraine's energy sector, has quietly slipped out of the country via a VIP taxi, according to a Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty.
He's not the only one, right?
Yeah.
The justice minister slipped the country. The energy minister slipped the country. And the former defense minister, Rustem Umerov, who is also implicated in all of this, also slipped the country. So, first of all, let's note that Zelensky saw all of this coming. When he attempted to take control of Nabu and Sapo a few months ago and was basically stopped from doing so by the Europeans, that was his attempt to avert what he obviously saw coming with this. Now, the big question isn't, right, we know everyone in Ukrainian politics is corrupt. So Nabu and Sapo were being wielded as a weapon to go after Zelensky and, you know, the people closest to him, like Timur Mindich, his wallet, right? Mindich was with Zelensky. They were co-founders of Zelensky's comedy entertainment company, Kvartal 95, right, decades ago. So they've been very close. And reportedly, I mean, that's the real danger, is Mindich supposedly is, if not Zelensky's closest confidant, then one of his closest confidants, and supposedly he should know, you know, where all the bodies are buried, you know, where you know what all the secrets are, and he collected essentially no bid contracts on. I mean, he had no experience, but you know, the war and Zelensky in control of the government. Suddenly, he became a defense contractor, right, and started up drone companies. And took control of the Ukrainian Energo Atom, the atomic company, you know, that provides half of Ukraine's electricity right now, and probably more than that after the last week, actually. You know, huge kickbacks, right? You know, huge scams, right? Contractors would have to pay Mindich a percentage just to get in the door on government contracts, all of this sort of thing. And of course, I'm sure that plenty of other officials, we know because they fled within the Zelensky regime, were also taking big chunks of this. And I mean, no one should be surprised by this. Even before the conflict, the Western media admitted that Ukraine was the most corrupt country in Europe. And I mean, that's just, the Western governments know that, you know, that's just part of the price of doing business, of having a proxy like Ukraine, is that a certain amount of it is always going to be siphoned away by the elite, and a pretty healthy. I mean, they're ticks, right? You know, they're going to suck their share of blood out of all of this. But the big question is, who's behind all of this, right? And you know, the Americans and the Europeans obviously have a kind of overhead level of control of Nabu and Sapo both. But I have to say that that's not what I see happening here. I haven't seen yet any signs that convince me that this is the Trump administration or even the Europeans moving against Zelensky, which I have to say is not really in their interests right now. Who else would they go to? This is going to cause the Kiev regime a great deal of destabilization. And that's at a point when it's already suffered huge blows just in the past couple of weeks on the battlefield with long-range strikes and the blackouts and everything else. They just don't need this. There's, you know, it's almost too late to switch a horse this late in the game. What the Ukrainian media is telling us, what the Telegram, you know, the media as it exists, the Telegram channels and the like, and what seems to me to be the most, you know, credible story of what is happening here, is that Danny, do you still have me?
Yeah, I can hear. I can't see you, but I can hear you. I don't know what happened to your camera. Yeah, it's completely blacked. Everyone, can you hear us? I think everyone can hear us from. Let me turn on the. Yeah, Mark, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, can't see you. Okay, so Mark will return as we continue on talking about this corruption scandal. It should come as no surprise in many respects that the Zelensky regime is incredibly corrupt. This is the character of the um, regime, and so Mark will come back. A lot of people make it out that the Zelensky regime is some kind of anomalous thing, and it's corrupt in and of itself. But of course, we can remember even that Times article that I showed from the United Kingdom, the Times. They talked about who Ukraine is relying on to fight in Pokrovsk, and it's the Azov forces. And so we're talking about literal neo Nazis being relied upon for for Ukraine's battle against Russia in the special military operation. But even more so, how often has this occurred in history where you have a country like Ukraine literally taken over through a coup by the United States, by NATO, and that country essentially becomes debt-ridden, completely financially, economically controlled by the outsiders, by the collective West, by the United States and their financial institutions. And then when they end up being foisted upon in a proxy war like this, they'll only become more corrupt, only become worse and worse and worse in terms of how they behave, because this is the kind of behavior the West actually likes to see to a point until it becomes a problem. Then when it becomes a problem, then they have to be cleaned up. That actually hasn't happened yet in Ukraine. Without further ado, though, everybody, I don't see Mark here anymore. Let's see if he sent an email at all. No, hopefully he returns in a minute. If not, then I can move on to a different story, and hopefully he will come back in short time. But yeah, no, this is the Zelensky corruption scandal is something that we all know is, or at least a lot of us know, is only going to get worse. And some have said, as recently as today, viewers were messaging saying that Zelensky may not come back from his trip from Greece, that he is on the hot seat. This has been a story for so long. This Zelensky being kind of on hot coal, that he is walking on a tightrope and he could be gone at any moment. I'm not going to hold my breath on that at this moment, just because the United States has no alternative. And even if the United States says they don't care about how Ukraine is governed, they at least want the conflict to go as it's going right now, which is status quo. Because if things turn for the worse politically in Ukraine, if there's a crisis the U.S. cannot clean up, then the conflict itself could be put into dire jeopardy, because politics have a deep impact on economics, and on military affairs. So if the Ukrainian government is in complete and utter disarray with absolutely no command structure that even U.S. intel can control, then it becomes an absolute mess for them. I'm going to see, I haven't received any message from Mark. So we can actually, I want to talk about my thoughts on both Venezuela and this kind of larger situation that the American empire is in. And we can do this as we wait for Mark to return. I have no idea what happened there, but hit the like button, everyone, because we'll stick around for another half hour or so to give him a chance to at least come back and finish his thoughts on what's going on in that corruption scandal. So let's do Venezuela for a bit, because I definitely had some things I wanted to show regarding this. So here we go. If the United States believes that overthrowing the Maduro government is going to be easy, if it believes that regime change is going to happen with the snap of a finger, if Donald Trump, as he mulls over what kind of attack he wants to lay upon the Venezuelan people, I think all of them have another thing coming. And this is now even being reported in the Western mainstream media. And when you see this, you might not trust it because the Western mainstream media has a huge record of lying. But when they begin to panic about outcomes that they'd rather not see happen, you can bet that this is actually on their mind. CNN says Trump is likely to face a long military commitment if chaos if he ousts Maduro in Venezuela, experts say. President Donald Trump said he believes Nicolas Maduro's days are numbered and that land strikes are possible. But experts say that the U.S. doesn't have military assets in place to launch a large-scale operation to... Oh, here's Mark. Okay, good. All right. We can get to that later then. Mark, my friend, you're back. Good to see you.
Good to be seen. So we were talking about who is behind these attacks, and what the Ukrainian Telegram channels with the media are telling us. What I think the most credible is that this is basically Zelensky's domestic political opponents from within the Maidan milieu, right? So we're looking at the former oligarch leader of the Kiev regime in Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, and some others. But also, crucially, who is also being implicated in this is the oligarch and former patron of Zelensky, Igor Kolomoisky, whom Zelensky basically separated himself from and actually allowed the wolves to be stuck to him a few times over the recent years. And Kolomoisky has made comments about Nabu and Sapo over the last few weeks, and that as a result of these investigations, Zelensky was over, he said. That it was done. So a lot of people are seeing this as that he is, shall we say, the hidden hand, which means that this is just dirty Kiev regime, internal knives being drawn and politics. And I think from what I can see, the Europeans and the Americans are still trying to understand how to react to this, trying to understand what is going on. There hasn't been any real organized response to this, which, again, either the Trump administration, if they are behind this, is being a lot quieter and subtler than they have ever been before, or that this is most likely domestic politics. And on one hand, anyone else who would replace Zelensky is not likely to change. They're not, suddenly going to come to the table and sign some peace terms on Russian terms or anything like that. That's simply not possible within the Maidan, right? Within the Maidan milieu. But the advantage that Russia could, face with all of this is simply that any destabilization of the regime works to their advantage. So I'm sure they're very interested in all of this too. Now, they don't want Zelensky replaced with someone more capable than him. They've said that multiple times before. We don't want to take out Zelensky because if we did, he would just be replaced with someone who makes a lot more rational decisions than Zelensky does. But yeah, this is, as far as I can tell, mostly dirty Ukrainian politics. It's not that none of this is real. It's just that everyone is guilty of this, and it's a matter of who it's being weaponized against whom. That is the salient question. Yeah, Zelensky is not being said. I mean, we've got comments from the Europeans. They're not going to suddenly stop delivering weapons or arms to Ukraine. They're simply going to have to squirm and make some noises to the media and demand that Zelensky create some type of investigation or commission or begin some new anti-corruption drive, right? That's the way it will be handled. But just in the last week, Germany announced that they're going to spend another $3 billion more on buying arms for Ukraine, right? From 8.5 billion to 11.5 billion. And they handed off some Patriots. And they announced that we're going to have conscription in Germany to prepare for the next phase after Kiev goes down, and we'll have to go to war with Russia directly. You know, that's obviously, at least that's the way that the Merzes and the Starmers and the Macrons and the Stubbs of Europe, that's the way they're thinking. But it's not going to stop the money supply, even if it makes the rhetorical gymnastics that the European leaders will have to make to continue justifying sending ever more European taxpayer monies to this, corruption cesspit in Ukraine, no matter who's in charge of it. They're going to have to keep doing it. They don't have a ladder to climb down from at this point. Not that they can envision anyway.
Yeah, well, I find it very interesting that the Zelensky regime is mired now in a massive escalation of a corruption scandal at the same time that the primary benefactor for a long time, the United States, is also now embroiled in one. It's almost
like father, like son.
Yeah, that's what I say. What the new age therapists call parallel process. It's happening.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Yeah. Right. So
you're gonna steal.
But but I mean, talk about how this could impact things then, Mark, because from what I see, we've been hearing about corruption in Ukraine for the longest of time, since the beginning of the conflict, since the overthrow of Ukraine in 2014, even. Russia, you said Russia might be looking at this or as it could be to their advantage as long as somebody more capable doesn't take the helm in Ukraine. But is Zelensky in danger? Some people have been saying to me, hey, he might be going to Greece and not come back. But I don't necessarily believe that, because I don't think something like that could be secret. But is he actually in trouble now as opposed to other times?
I don't see that. I mean, obviously, lawsuits are going to be launched. Some of his allies are fleeing the country, that sort of thing. I think he's going to be politically weakened out of all of this. But ultimately, Zelensky has his position because the Americans say he does, right? And until the Americans say that he doesn't, right, that he doesn't have their support, and to a lesser extent the Europeans, but even they take their cues from the Americans. Until then, he's not going to be replaced internally, right? Unless they get a green light from the United States, and I don't see that at this point, because I don't see anyone else credible that they could pass it off to that would, take Zelensky's place at this late stage in the game. So I think this is only going to have very limited impact. I don't see Zelensky being forced to step down unless the Trump administration suddenly, which they haven't done thus far, weigh into it and say, yeah, get rid of the bum. That's the only possibility of his removal. He holds his power due to the United States, and he will not be removed either internally or at least by, the Europeans or anyone else, at least on that side, unless America says so.
And then lastly on this, Mark, maybe you could help us understand how exactly this kind of political chaos could affect things militarily, because from my impressions, it seems that the Ukrainian military is not necessarily directed by Zelensky himself. So how does this How does this kind of situation affect things militarily? In this context, is there historical precedent? Your thoughts?
Well, I would actually question that because any military general who was actually in charge of the Ukrainian military before this would have had tactical withdrawals from multiple places that the Kiev regime couldn't defend anymore, like Pokrovsk, right? For like Avdiivka, other even Bakhmut early on, and it was the political direction of Zelensky, the Kursk incursion. This was a political decision, and particularly to hang on to it, a political decision. So I'm pretty sure that Sersky takes most of his orders directly from Zelensky, whether they make military sense or not. So I think it does matter to a certain point who is sitting in the chair in Bankova, right, in the Kiev regime's leadership position, because I think he's directing at a political level what's happening militarily on the Ukrainian side to a much greater degree than, say, Putin is directing things on the Russian side, because he seems to have taken a very standoff, at least after the first few months of the conflict, and let the generals run their war, where the exact opposite is with the Kiev regime. But I mean, other than saying no step back, no surrender, no retreat, other than like that, I don't know what else he needs to say. The Kiev regime will keep fighting, and they'll keep losing, and they'll keep hemorrhaging men and equipment. And that's not going to change whether Zelensky is in domestic, political, and legal trouble or not. So the biggest threat is that more European countries might stop sending arms and money. Now, not any of the major ones, right? But we could see increasing political resistance in some of the second tier Ukrainian countries. That's a possibility. And every couple 100 million matters. When we're talking this war and how much corruption has to be siphoned off, by the elite and in all of this, and how much actually gets to the troops. But ultimately, I see this shaking the pillars of the regime, but not bringing it down. And ultimately, then it will have limited effect on the battlefield. You could make the argument that it will shake the morale of the troops. But to be perfectly honest, I don't think it matters really to the troops. I mean, they hate their political elite in Kiev. That's not why most of them, whether they are the ideologicals, the Banderites, or whether they are the conscripts, that have been forced out there, neither of them love Zelensky and his administration, and none of this surprises any of them. They're either forced to be there, or they're there for their own Banderite fascist ideology. It has nothing to do with, oh, my president is corrupt, how can I fight on? No, I don't buy that it will have any significant moral effect. But there is just a general background noise, right, in the idea of the stability of the regime, right? And that is going to be shaken by this. So in that sense, there could be a more general weakening in the belief that the regime is in control of the situation, or not, as the case in Pokrovsk certainly shows.
Yeah, and then I'm like, where are the Ukrainian people in all of this? I can only imagine that there are many factors here that
there are victims. And
that's what I'm saying.
That are apathetic and keeping their heads down, and then there are those who only sees Zelensky as a tool to get what they want from the West, and that's it. So
Right.
the rest of these Ukrainian people know to just keep their heads down and to try to survive all of this, right? How can you protest when any man, of the age of 25 or older who shows up at a protest would immediately be sent to the front? That is extremely protest limiting. And that is exactly why it is generally believed that just a couple of months ago that Zelensky opened the borders for the first time since the conflict started for Ukrainian men from the ages of 18 to 22 is to bleed off the potential men that could protest, right? Or could be directed to protest. And it worked because now Germany and other European countries are flooded with young Ukrainian men, and they're not happy about that whole thing because they would much rather have them dying for their interests of proxy war. Merz made exactly that comment this week, that he wants Zelensky to keep his young men in his country, right? Fighting for us there. I mean, that, fighting and dying for us there being the unspoken part. And now we have the Trump administration talking about deporting. Now, they're only talking at the moment 80 Ukrainian men who have supposedly broken U.S. laws and everything like that. But I see more like that as the initial opening of the gate.
Like precedent,
the precedent, right? Not only for the United States, but for European countries as well.
Yes.
Where this is all moving is that the West is going to start forcibly deporting Ukrainian men that are refugees in their countries back to the regime so that they can be conscripted and then die. I mean, literally sending these men to their deaths. That is what they'll be doing because it's long being recognized that the Kiev regime is running out of men, right? And there's at least a few 100,000 more in Europe that could be sent off to buy another few months for the regime, half a year.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of like what the French, the British, and the U.S. at certain points in history would do in colonial situations, or when the World War started, right? Like
exactly
they would take Algerians, the French, the British would take
Indians, right?
the Indians, and throw them into a conflict in Europe against. And
there's very limited difference between that situation and what is happening with Ukraine today. Just like then, there were local elites who were perfectly on board with that and so forth, and that's the same thing with the Maidan regime and Zelensky at the helm of it now. It's the same thing.
Right. And it's so striking too, because what the message that sends is, doesn't matter if you're a West Ukraine, Kiev kind of whatever, act like you leave, you go to Europe, you go to the US, supposed to be okay. No, that does it. No, there's a bigger war to be fought. To me that sends a pretty harsh message to anyone who considers themselves, I guess, Ukrainian at this point, because we all know now Russia's territory of East Ukraine, the formerly East Ukraine, different picture, I'm sure. But Mark, maybe we can get into final comments on the Venezuela situation now. I pulled up a story. I wanted to your comment on it. Now the Western mainstream media is saying that this particular kind of war from the Trump administration may not be as easy as maybe Trump believes it to be. And here's what CNN said. Trump likely to face a long military commitment and chaos if he ousts Maduro in Venezuela. And this is what is so interesting. They talk about this. They say if Trump did order strikes in Venezuela aimed at ousting Maduro, he could face serious challenges with fractured opposition elements, a military poised for insurgency. They don't often mention this, but since the Hugo Chavez times, the military has been incredibly difficult to crack in terms of turning, and as well as political backlash at home for a president who promised to avoid costly entanglements overseas. They don't also talk about what they don't talk about is the possible regional implications of what it means for the U.S. to be bombing and or invading a country like Venezuela in their so-called backyard, nor do they mention the operation that Hegseth just announced that essentially says Latin America is, or South America is, our neighborhood. So talk about this, and then I want to pull up a video that is also striking, I think. But first, react to this.
Yeah, so I mean, this is pretty much, they're saying exactly what I said just before, is that removing Maduro, decapitation strikes, the CIA co-option, that's the easy part. That is it. It is what happens after that is that the question mark is, and it will be determine how the Venezuelan people view this. Because if they don't agree with the overthrow of their government and putting this Marina Karina Guaido or whoever the U.S. wants to put in charge of their country, they could either quietly, grumblingly acquiesce to it, or they can wage counterinsurgency warfare and then make governance of this country extremely difficult, which ultimately would be, it would in increments force Trump to make ever greater commitments, right? So first it would just be a few hundred Marines and special forces, and then maybe they'd have to put military police down, and then they'd have to do this and that, and attempt to stabilize the situation. That is where the potential trap is. That is where the quagmire is. And I forgive me for ever agreeing with what was at the New York Times, but yeah, I basically agree that
CNN close.
CNN, yeah, same thing. That is essentially where the real danger for the U.S. lies in, right? Because simply taking out Maduro and sending a couple hundred special forces and Marines in to hold open the gates for the opposition, but then the question, can the opposition, the pro-U.S. opposition, suddenly take power and be accepted by the country? Right. That's where the real story is. And I don't know enough about Venezuela on the ground to make an assessment that way. I know lots of people are telling me that will never happen. And I certainly hope that Maduro has and Chavez before him have made a very good job of hardening up the military against that kind of co-option. I hope they do a better job than Assad did, for instance. Right. But it works, and then it doesn't, right? We saw the U.S. did this in Iraq in 2003, when large numbers of Iraqi generals had their troops to stand down, right, which was part of what it made it such a cakewalk for the United States. Very few of them actually fought. They did it in Libya at the end, in Tripoli, when the city garrison commander just ordered his troops to stand down and open the door for Qatari special forces and the like. And they did it in Syria too, with Turkish intelligence, right? We can't forget the Turks' role. I mean, maybe even taking the helm there, but I'm sure the CIA and MI6 were backing them up there. Yeah. But they also tried to do it in Iran, and it wasn't as successful there, right? The decapitation strikes didn't have the result. The co-option didn't have the result that they wanted. So it's not written in stone, right? That this will be successful. It's a lot closer to them. And there is a much more active, pro-oligarch, pro-U.S. opposition in Venezuela. It's probably a minority of the population, but I would say it's probably at least 30%. That would back all of this. It's just how much the rest of the population is opposed to it. And we'll see that play out. So this, I think CNN is actually calling this one correctly, that, there is a potential quagmire of, U.S. occupation, even if it doesn't start out that way, even if that isn't the attention of the Trump administration, they could inevitably be dragged into it, right? Oh, we just wanted to assassinate the leadership and install a government and think we could just walk away from
We
it.
had noble intentions.
We had
as Obama would say, we had good intentions here.
intentions. Yeah. So, but
Yeah.
you're right. There are regional implications because, I mean, Trump has already sanctioned the president of Colombia just for opening his mouth, right? And the U.S. is talking about sending troops into Mexico with their leftist president there who's not happy about it. And foreign policy is already doing stories about how this can be expanded into Cuba, salivating at the prospect as well. And we know that Marco Rubio would just love that.
Yeah, well, he's blowing Bubba with that one. Yeah,
blowing Bubba. Is that the
that's
new term now?
Yeah, that's the Epstein.
I got it.
Clinton, Trump. There was an exchange anyway. But he would be.
There are all kinds of rooms for horizontal escalation of this as well.
Yeah, and that, I'm wondering if some of the fear, Mark, this image, this video, I'm not going to play the video because StreamYard has been incredibly ridiculous with the videos on screen, but I will put up the tweet from a journalist, Ali Vargas, who covers Latin America. He says, as the U.S. tries to intimidate Maduro, it's out with people in the capital organized by the communes and the working class districts. And I mean, one thing that this government has always had is the poor, which is the majority of the people. Even in elections where they didn't do as well, they always have outperformed in these areas. And this is Maduro, as the CIA has announced that there's an operation inside of the country to kill him. He's out and about. He's out and about with a bunch of people. I'm wondering if the backlash, because it could turn into a kind of civil war, like a class-based civil war, obviously, but a civil war where that country is going to be totally destabilized. And I don't know how that would reflect on a Trump administration now drowning in Epstein stuff and unable to really do anything. Back in 2002, when they kidnapped Chavez, as much as Bush was terrible, neocon hawk, his administration was far more competent from what I'm seeing. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, remember what happened with Libya, right? Libya completely fell apart as a state, and there has just been, pauses in civil conflict in that poor, ruined country, that, failed state since the overthrow, the U.S., the Western-backed overthrow of Gaddafi. But that hasn't stopped them from at least pumping some oil out of Libya, out of some parts of Libya, at least, to the Europeans. How much that's going to be possible in Venezuela, I don't know. And I'm not going to pretend that I know otherwise. But would there be domestic political repercussions? Only so much, because, whatever the Democrats may be posturing now, I'm sure behind closed doors, they actually support all of this, right? I mean, it's kind of accepted in the U.S. that Democrats are opposed to wars that Republican presidents start, and Republicans are opposed to wars that Democratic presidents start. I mean, that's just kind of the team sport view of foreign policy that is American politics. But ultimately, whether the U.S. public approves or disapproves of what happens in Venezuela has very limited effect on what the U.S. government actually does, either before the fact or after.
Right. Yeah. I would see less of the U.S. public being the force that prevents a kind of major escalation, and more so just the absolute how terrible it would both look, and it could damage, if there's a damage U.S. interests. If what I see as a divided Latin America right now, I don't see it as a complete, that part of the world is not necessarily in the anti-U.S. camp fully or not. A lot of it has actually, I mean, look at Malay, right? I mean, this guy just bows down to Israel and the U.S. gets a bailout, $40 billion. This continent is
Yeah.
more, I would say, Bolivia just had an election that favors the U.S. So that all of that could be put into jeopardy.
There is. I mean, the U.S. already, it would simply reinforce the rest of the world moving away from the United States and into the orbit of China, or the China, Russia, Iran, alignment. It would just reinforce everything they already know and believe about the United States. But that type of diplomatic thinking is, I think, just beyond the ability of anyone currently in the White House right now. They might, at odds, care what the public perception is. But I think at this point, after all of this buildup and posturing, that Trump would probably suffer more from the media if he tacoed out now and did nothing than if he went through with it and suffered a quagmire.
Right.
I mean, he has, my belief is that he started ordering forces there almost on a whim, and they were building up, and they didn't even know exactly what they were going to do at first. That's what it seems to me, that they started building up forces. And I'm sure people were, if we just put enough pressure on him, he'll go to Russia or China. I mean, I've heard multiple U.S. officials suggest that he should just leave. So I'm sure that that's what they were hoping, or some people in the U.S. Administration, and political sphere were telling themselves was going to happen. That's the story. But of course that didn't work, and now they're stuck doing something. Even if that's not, again, I don't believe there is at least immediately any cards for a full-scale U.S. invasion. That's not what they're hoping for. But that's not what they were hoping for in Vietnam when the U.S. first got involved either. So there's lots of different ways this could go.
Oh, yeah. Well, in Vietnam, they were hoping for a nice little,
One thing that is absolutely going to happen is that the price of oil is going to go up.
Yeah.
That inflation and gas price in the U.S. is going to go up. And Russia's wartime coffers are going to go up as a result of all of this.
Well, that middle one, Mark, that has, even if the U.S. public is apathetic, even, maybe he doesn't like war, doesn't want war, but apathetic on moving with their feet about that middle one will indeed, that's like an election determiner, when we have midterm elections coming up. That really, I mean, the Democrats hate them, neocon hawks, all the same. They will sweep the Congress if there's at the same time a major spike in oil prices and inflation, which is already out of control in the U.S. Completely out of control.
It's globally. Inflation is a global crisis.
Right. What was I gonna say? With this, Mark, I had. Now it's completely slipping my mind. Oh yes. Do you see then? From what your analysis and from what I've been thinking about in terms of as the U.S. has escalated this, brought the, Gerald Ford, continues the strikes on the boats, continues with this rhetoric, and now a military operation. They obviously need to do something. Do you see a similar situation to like Iran, sans a direct attack from Israel beforehand? Do you see a kind of limited bombing campaign where Trump can say, hey, I did it, and then got the hell out of there without even just a similar to Iran? I mean, Pezeshkian, or the IRG, the IRGC, the Islamic Republic, it stands, but they hit the country. Do you see that as a major?
Yeah. I mean, no matter what happens, right? I mean, taking out Maduro and the immediate Venezuelan government, like I said, is the easy part. It's what comes after that. No, regardless, Trump will declare victory, right? If they just are able to get a hold of Maduro, or show that he was killed or something, Trump will declare victory. I got rid of the narco terrorist, communist, whatever else they're calling him these days, as their justification for their hegemony, their imperialism. But again, it could get very complicated for the United States in the aftermath. Now, I think the U.S. has got to do something, and decapitation strikes, are the easiest thing, right? So that almost makes them not a certainty, but a very high likelihood at this point. That's what we're going to see, probably in the very near future. It's what happens after that, and how involved the Trump administration gets, and where they decide to throw up their hands and walk away if they need be. And the problem, of course, is that a large segment of the American people, if Trump just takes out Maduro and then waits to see what happens and doesn't get the U.S. intimately involved on the ground there, I don't know that there will be very significant domestic political repercussions from that. Again, as you pointed out, the biggest salient factor there being, the cost at the pump and thus the inflation that results from that. That's the biggest. That might be giving the Trump administration more hesitation than anything else at this point.
Right, and I'm sure they're trying to. In the back channels or front channels, whatever, with Saudi Arabia attempting to say, hey, when this happens, can you pump, baby, to lower the price? I don't think even Saudi Arabia would do something like that.
Ultimately, if we want to compare the situation to Iran, though, right, we're talking a decapitation strike. Venezuela does not have the long-range strike capability to hit back that Iran does. They don't have they don't even have they've got a limited Russian provided air defense, but there's also a question of what kind of working order after years of sanctions, how much of that is in, and as bad as Iranian air defense performed, at least in the initial phases of the 12-day war, the Venezuelan will doubtless perform less well. And there's also the unfortunate factor for Venezuela of simple geography. They're in the Western Hemisphere, much closer to the beast, whereas Iran was much safer on the far side of the world, right, from the United States, and that geography matters. Just like Ukraine might wish it could find itself as an island in the middle of Atlantic, Venezuela might wish to hope that it was actually part of the Eurasian landmass, but it doesn't work that way.
I mean, what I found so curious about all of this, Mark, in the lead up as we are here now, is the way that the Trump administration went about justifying all of this. Because what was so astounding about it is it was literally like a WMD justification, and even combining this whole drug war, narco war,
fentanyl,
with terrorism. So now we have this term narco-terrorist, which only reminds, this is why I find it so interesting in terms of if there's an economic calamity that comes out of it, people in the United States, if there's anything that will piss off the last several generations, it's hearing the word terrorism with war. Because there is nothing that anyone in the United States has any knowledge about what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. They don't Gen Xers, whatever people, they don't like to hear that. And so I just found it so interesting that that's how the Trump administration decided to go about this.
I mean,
narco-terrorism is
narco-terrorism is just a new derivation, but the charges of drug involvement have been used before with Panama and Nicaragua, so Noriega. I mean, all of this has precedent, and it was accepted by the American public and the American media, and the other U.S. political party, the other side of the U.S. Two-party ruling system before. So there's no reason why they can't just fall back on that old playbook, right? Narco-terrorist is just the new securitization term of demonizing a geopolitical opponent of the United States. And, it's been made clear, what sins Venezuela has committed. There are quite a number of them. Being lefty is an important one for Trump because he hates lefty. I mean, that's enough. But they've been quite clear. Venezuela is seen as aligned with Russia and Russia and China are the enemy. So that is just further excuse. I mean, none of this is ever done for just one reason, but when you combine that with the potential oil reserves, right, and everything else, again, Venezuela is seen as a low-hanging, juicy piece of fruit right now by the Trump administration. An easy win. Right now, CNN's calling that it may not be as easy as they think. It never is, though. I mean, but it doesn't make that fruit look any less appetizing to Trump, who is about to try to pick it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there are any more ripe options, at least for those that really make geopolitical, economic, military.
Greenland, go for Greenland. Go for Greenland.
Maybe you can, to close here, Mark, talk about the relationship with Venezuela and even Latin America with Russia and China, because despite Donald Trump, what you just said there, despite Donald Trump seemingly always praising Xi Jinping and Putin and looking very meager and weak and meek with them. Yeah, Russia and China are still the enemies. I mean, Trump just signed off on a Taiwan arms sale. It's just
pay very limited attention to anything that Trump says.
Exactly.
He reverses himself every 15 minutes on a dime. Zelensky's a dictator. No, he's not. I would never say anything like that.
He just sent weapons. He just signed off on weapons to Taiwan, all the while saying Xi Jinping, what a great leader and a great country.
Yeah,
it's but continue.
Yeah. So don't take anything that Trump says at any given moment very much seriousness, because Medvedev has addressed that before. How do you deal with a president, on the other side who changes his opinion with every other social media post? You don't. You ignore it and you see what's happening long term, what is actually happening, not what is being said. And in this case, what's happening is a very large flotilla is being built up off the coast of Venezuela, and that's just hard to ignore. All right, Russia and a new strategic partnership between Venezuela and Russia just came into force. And if the Venezuelan government is overthrown by the United States, that's going to be a huge embarrassment, I would think, for the Russian government. Obviously, they can't defend someone that they just made a strategic partnership with. And again, if Venezuela had a different geography, Russia might be willing to try to defend some other country more. But they couldn't even stop the Ukrainian government from being overthrown, just over a decade ago. So they have they have much greater relative power than they did right now than they did back in 2014. But still not so much in the Western Hemisphere. Russia and China's ability to help Venezuela militarily or even diplomatically is very limited. I would say that China actually, potentially has more economic leverage, but I haven't seen any indication that they're willing to use their newfound economic leverage over the U.S. on anything more than the trade wars with the United States. They're not yet willing to try to expend that as, shall we say, geopolitical shield or coverage for Venezuela. I don't think it would be that as effective for them in that particular try of extending that leverage to non-trade matters, to geopolitical matters. So I believe that the Russia and China would very much like to see the Venezuelan government continue, but I think they have very limited. In fact, I think if they open up their mouths too loudly, they're likely to encourage exactly what they might, what they almost definitely don't want to see happen. But I'm sure that Russia and China also both understand that, as with always, it's the long history of U.S. involvement with these things, that there are always unintended consequences that in the long term could play in their favor, even if in the short to medium term are not very good for the Venezuelan people. But that's just what the cards that they're dealt with. There is very little realistically they can do. A lot of people have very overinflated ideas of Russia and China's ability to project power, much less to project power into the Western Hemisphere. They don't.
Yeah, and I think it's also intentional, really, for these guys. Unlike those who have a conception of a realist foreign policy outlook, as all countries all the time are looking to become whatever the current hegemon is. Neither Russia nor China, especially China, which has a longer history of being, you could say, being sovereign than the current Russian Federation. Neither of them built their militaries, neither of them built their entire systems to do that. So there's an intention behind it, regardless of the technological capabilities. It's like, unless, like, similar to Iran, like Iran wasn't begging anybody to come to their rescue.
Maybe they should have been, but they weren't.
But like that's just the reality, is like there is this hardcore commitment.
The Soviet and Russian military were built defensively to withstand a United States. Look at the single standouts of the Russian military system are air defense and electronic warfare. Those were the asymmetric response to what was relatively believed to be a NATO superiority in air power and long-range strikes. That is defensive, right? That is what the Soviet and military focus of their R&D and development were for decades. And that's why U.S. air defense sucks so badly, and they have such problems with it, production and performance and everything else. And while that's Russia's strength, that is a result of that. But it's also a result that Russia can't send an aircraft carrier group into the Caribbean to defend Venezuela, while the U.S., is just, they can send off-duty aircraft carriers and have others to patrol other parts of the world to do that. The Russian and Chinese military are not built for power projection, right? Certainly not yet, right? China could be extending, right? They're developing now a blue water navy, but that is still decades into the future.
And will be used for defense. Like, it'll be used as the most optimal defense, too. Yeah, that's the most optimal defense. But
Russia and China, right? They don't sit in the Kremlin and what do we do today to protect the rest of the world from the United States? No. Right? They defend their national people, their national interests. And it would be hubris, to think that they could do otherwise. And they're not as susceptible to that type of hubris as the U.S. is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of also romanticism about the Soviet era, the Cold War.
Sure.
Because there was, China and Russia did provide, let's say, at that time, you could say light military assistance, because it was always lighted. Soviet tanks were not rolling through anything. It was arms, and a lot of that was based on very particular circumstances. Usually when the people themselves in the countries in question wanted it and were ready and were honestly in a very good position, right? Like, that's how assistance really works. There is a big element to realism, and I also see in this period Russia and China's actual assistance as sovereign countries, especially economically and even militarily, I would say dwarfs whatever the Soviet Union or even the countries back during the Cold War could do, because that economic assistance is very useful for sovereign countries. And I think sometimes it gets underplayed. That gets underplayed, and what gets overplayed is, can Russia and China be the saviors of other countries? That's how that's why I often see it as problematic as like, oh, Russia and China's not doing enough, because it's like, well, it's a lot now in terms of just what they can do versus the Cold War. I mean, what would you rather have, light arms or incredible infrastructure, right? Right. Like, what would you rather have? that's
Russia is not the Soviet Union, right?
Right. Exactly.
And people need to understand that Russia has much more limited geopolitical horizons than the Soviet Union, right? Russia has half the population that the Soviet Union had, right? And all of this other doesn't have the Warsaw Pact and everything else.
Yep.
But even if we're going to take a look at a situation with Cuba, right, where Russia confronted the United States with Cuba and the Cuban Missile Crisis, Russia only put missiles in Cuba, not to confront the United States, because the U.S. put missiles in Turkey and Europe, right? Exactly. Again, it's out of self-preservation and interest that they did that, right? And one Russian politician opening his mouth about Oreshniks in Venezuela is unrealistic and probably does more damage than is any type of serious possibility at the moment, unfortunately.
Well, lots to come, Mark. It was a great show with you today. I want to make sure everyone knows that your Boosty account is in the video description, so you can find all of Mark's work and support his work. Hit the like button before you go. All the places to support this channel are also there: Patreon, Substack, and much more. Mark, anything that you want to impart that I have not said?
Yeah, I don't do hope and I don't do prayers, but that said, for what it's worth, my hope and prayers are with the Venezuelan people.
Yeah, and my only hope is that they're gonna fight like hell. And that's gonna be it's gonna be very, very interesting to see what comes next. All right, everybody, hit that like button before you go. Video description, all the places to find Mark and my own ways of support. And I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers.